Knowing about things always helps you to see them differently. And also you learn to appreciate them differently. That in itself is very enriching. I'm a photographer mostly. I'm also an author. My books are mostly about flowers. Not just flowers in themselves, but their human histories, the stories that they tell, the culture that's attached to them. It's always very interesting for me to learn about different people, what they do, different ways of seeing things. It is nice to be able to bring those stories to the fore. It gives the photographs more meaning. All the work has allowed me to experience the world in a way that I couldn't have otherwise. So I was born in a seaside town in Vietnam. We spent a lot of time in nature, either by the sea or up in the highlands. When we left Vietnam, we had to leave in a hurry. My dad was a colonel in the South Vietnamese army. So the thought was that if we stayed, we wouldn't have had the future that my parents wanted for us. They decided that we had to leave by all means. My father had been somewhat of an amateur photographer. He took a lot of photos of us, and he took a lot of Super 8 films of us as well. Everything was boxed up, and the idea was that they would be sent off after us. And so when we lost the country, the housekeeper decided that it would be best to remove all traces of us. So those boxes were all burned. When I found out, it was kind of a numb feeling, but it stayed with me for a long time, and it stayed. It was the greatest sense of loss I'd ever experienced. It took me a long time to actually process that. So I don't know if becoming a photographer was a conscious decision on that experience, but on some subconscious level, that had something to do with it. I always think of photography, or any kind of art really, as a process of mediation. You take something in the world and you process it through yourself. So it's a lot of yourself in it, and it's what makes that work different and unique. It's about showing something that maybe other people haven't seen before. To show beauty as you have not seen. For me, to show the tenderness instead of the violence of the world. In Vietnam, we couldn't grow roses where we lived because it's very hot, it's tropical. So my dad made a couple of gardens in America. He had a little rose bed, tiny rose bed, and I think it was the first time that he grew roses. They weren't anything special, we didn't know much about old roses or anything like that. on the last sort of week of his life. He was in hospice at home, and he stayed mostly in bed. In his room, there's a window that looked out onto the rose bed. It was right outside. The roses were just starting to bud out, and it was April, early April. So every day that last week, I would go outside after, being with him, and I would look at the rose bed and I was like, oh gosh, I hope they bloom. I hope they bloom soon. But they didn't. When I came back to New York, I had been doing some volunteer work at the Brooklyn Botanic Garden, and I got to know the rosarian really well. We would talk about roses, and I decided I wanted to photograph them. And then we'd get a big bucket, and she would cut different varieties, and I would take the bucket home on the subway. I would photograph them by myself and think about the stories about each one and the stories in different cultures. It was a way of just sort of keeping my father with me longer. It reminds me of him all the time. My dad was a very caring person. That sense of responsibility for people I observed in my parents all my life. I learned to care from them. From there, I just sort of dug deeper and deeper into roses. At some point, my publisher said, "What is your next book? What do you want to do?" And I said, "Oh, roses. I want to do a book on roses." And here we are. Floret is the last story of the book, and it's all about Aaron's preservation effort to save these stories for future generations. There are roses that go back hundreds of years, and if they are not grown anymore and they disappear, those stories disappear with them. It all comes down for me to a deepening knowledge of things will always reward you with a better appreciation. So much of my work, I think, is about how I feel when I'm doing it. Grief at the beginning is always very intense, and after a while it's less sharp. I can almost be happy now, thinking of him and how he would marvel at the variety and the abundance of it. Especially here. He never would have imagined all these places, and I carry him with me in that way. I'm always looking for the magic in the flowers. That magic is always there. The writer Ocean Vuong said something really amazing about beauty, and to the effect that it is medicine for the world. The world can be very hard and harsh and violent, but it can also be really beautiful, and it is good to be reminded of that.